How's everyone doing out there? Woo! Awesome. All right, so today we're going to talk about 6 innovations that reinvent data protection for S3. And it's been kind of a fun, exciting journey to build this product and platform. And so we're excited to kind of go through this today. My name is Chad Kenny. I'm the Vice President of Product here at Clumio. I'm joined by my friend Charlie.
Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? My name is Charlie Gautreaux with Defiance Digital. I lead products and services. We're an AWS managed services provider. Excited to join Chad and talk a little bit about Clumio today.
Awesome. So on today's agenda, we're going to go through both of our platforms just so you can get familiarized with what they are. And then we're going to dive pretty deep into some of the S3 innovations that we built into the platform to protect customers' data sets. I will say at the beginning of this that we spent time with hundreds and hundreds of customers before even starting this journey to spend a lot of time listening and understanding exactly what those pains and challenges are before we started the journey on this, and really honed in on some of the key characteristics which you'll see in the 6 innovations that we'll talk about throughout the session. So first off, for Clumio, we are a backup as a service offering built in the public cloud for the public cloud that enables customers to be able to protect things like RDS, EC2, EBS, DynamoDB, and recently S3. And the nice part about this platform is that it also supports other clouds as well. We support Microsoft 365 and VMware Cloud running in AWS. The things customers absolutely love about the platform is first, it's highly scalable and cloud native, which allows them to scale into any size environment that they have, whether they're using some of the more lift and shift type componentry with EC2 and EBS, or whether they're using more cloud native data sources in the Dynamo RDS or in S3. We've focused on really being able to deliver very quick, granular restores. And one of the challenges here is that data protection in the public cloud tended to be very instance-based in its recovery mechanisms. And so by providing indexing and cataloging of data sets, it allowed customers to be able to restore data incredibly quickly, but also find it fast, which is not about just moving bits. It's also about just finding the data quickly. We decided instead of just doing snapshot management, which you see in many products that exist out there in today's market, we decided to air-gap data into our service outside the customer's environment, but also, as you'll see here, provide snapshot orchestration when needed for operational recovery. But we provide the most advanced ransomware protection in the public cloud by actually removing the data out of the security sphere of the customer's environment and into our service. Since we're a SaaS service, we have the ability to be able to see everything at a functional level, which allows us to be very proactive in the way that we support our customers. And so a fun fact is about 82% of our support tickets were opened up automatically for our customers and resolved before they even realized that it happened. And with building a platform, we enable a whole bunch of net new efficiencies, which many people can try to build themselves, but doing this at scale is very, very problematic, as you'll see in some of the presentation that we go through. And so both providing the SaaS simplicity and operational excellence, but also reducing cost by about 50%. You're going to hear a bunch of different terms around the platform itself. We'll focus mostly on Clumio Protect today, which is our next generation public cloud backup solution that allows that quick recovery and the like. But also check out Clumio Discover. It was a product that was really built upon challenges that customers told us about with the lack of visibility. I don't know what's going on across all of my accounts, all of my services, and it gives you one single pane of glass to manage not only at an asset level to understand what's going on, but also the ability to be able to see ransomware profiles. And check out at our booth many of these demos so you can get deeper into Clumio Discover to understand how we can help you understand your data environment better so that you can protect it in a much more effective manner. And then you also hear throughout the ability to be able to do out-of-region backups. This was an availability componentry which allowed us to be able to move data outside the region it was generated in and move it somewhere else, so that you could have the ability to be able to recover it in the event of a regional outage. And so this gives you an alternate, additional layer of protection out there. Charlie, maybe you can go over quickly what the Defiance is.
Yeah, you bet. So a little bit about Defiance. As I said, we're a managed services provider for AWS. Our focus is really on advancing cloud services and the value that public cloud can bring to your business. Our focus and services are really designed everywhere from automation to operations, and security, and of course data protection, which we're going to drive into as well. Next slide, please. As we looked at the market in terms of what would a data protection solution look like for our clients and our services, We looked at no less than, I would say, a half a dozen different solutions out there, most of which we thought were truly designed for the data center. That means essentially the alignment between storage and compute was somewhat tied, and scale was always very difficult. As you can imagine, our team manages a large number of customers, and like you guys, a larger number of accounts. Every one of these accounts for most solutions had to have some level of compute and some level of storage that we would have to manage at the end of the day. And this was really a game changer for us. We came across Clumio, and everything was totally different. It was built for the cloud. It used Amazon APIs. We didn't have to manage the compute or the storage, and it provided that API level access that our team was looking for. Next slide. So as we looked across these solutions, as I mentioned, many of which, as you can imagine, were prone to error. If you have to scale compute and storage and build it out yourself for your data protection, that's definitely prone to error. Most of which were not immutable, in the sense someone could delete your data, an accidental account deletion, accidental errors could occur. And as I said, they're difficult to scale. Clumio, on the other hand, was fully immutable for us. We were able to scale it independent of a storage and compute layer, and a true service that we could depend on at the end of the day. Next slide.
Awesome. So next what we're going to do is dive into Clumio Protect so you can understand how it functions before we showcase some of the innovations that we built in for S3. What Clumio Protect does is it enables customers to be able to enhance their overall AWS protection environment. There are a lot of APIs that you can go and build yourself and try to orchestrate and automate. But at the end of the day, what we've done is built a service that allows you to build in simplicity and be able to deliver quick recovery very, very fast. The first key tenet that we built the platform around was security. You'll see a whole bunch of fun facilities that we built into the platform, not only just immutability, but many other security features along the way, including some of the compliance and some of the security requirements that we had to put in place to ensure that data is safe. Data is air-gapped outside the customer's environment, which is great. So we're not just taking a snapshot and leaving it in the account, nor replicating the snapshot to another account. We're actually ingesting that data into what we call Secure Vault, which I'll show you here in a moment. We also provide these global actionable insights. One of the biggest things for customers that we heard was, I don't know if I'm overprotecting or underprotecting, or whether I've just forgotten to protect altogether. The fear that many CISOs or cloud operations managers or just DevOps engineers was that somebody was going to tag something with a capital letter versus a lowercase letter, and something was going to become unprotected, and then in the event of a loss of data, they would be vulnerable to not being able to get that data back. And so being able to report across all of these environments is one of the key tenets that we're focusing on. The rapid recovery reduces the overall RTO and RPO by giving you not only fine-grained granularity to recover the data, but also give you fine-grained granularity in the way that you protect the data. So you can protect it in an EBS volume or an EC2 instance or just a prefix or just a tag in S3. And this gives you all these inherent abilities to classify the data that you truly want to protect versus having to just protect it all because it happens to be tagged that way. And then by doing so, we reduce the overall TCO because you don't have to protect everything. And you'll see this in S3 big time. Instead of protecting an entire bucket, you now have the ability of being much more fine-grained in how you actually protect that data. And this lowers the overall TCO in many cases by 50%, and even more so when you get into the world of replicating the data to an alternate account. The way the platform works, first and foremost, is we have two really big technologies, one of which is called Clumio Snap. This looks like most of the other products that are in the market today, and ones that you could automate and orchestrate yourself through AWS Backup or other solutions that exist out in the market today. These are great for operational recovery because you have the ability to be able to recover in account with a snapshot that happens incredibly quickly. But we believe that data protection needs to go well beyond that, and that's really where we're enhancing this environment. Not only can we manage your operational recovery with Clumio Snap, we also provide a product called Clumio Secure Vault, which allows you to move the data outside the security sphere. You don't need to manage the IAM roles. You don't need to manage the security, do quarterly pen tests, or anything. It is 100% managed for you, and data is always available when you need to recover that. And it allows you for all of these great abilities for fine-grained recovery as well, for file-level indexing, cataloging, and being able to get to the data quickly. Clumio Protect for S3 was really based upon all of the same fundamental things that we talked about, but there were some new things that we started to learn as we started to talk to hundreds of customers about this problem. What was interesting is, there's been a lot of solutions around how people would protect S3, but they were much more like homegrown built solutions to try to orchestrate versioning or replication. But there's been some major things that have shifted in S3 that really requires data protection in the first place. The first one is that S3 was known to be kind of a place to just put a bunch of data of various different types, but more static in nature. But the applications have changed dramatically, where S3 has now become much more critical to enterprises. Now, these modern, ephemeral-based applications are using Object for its scalability, for its high durability, for its ability to replicate data everywhere. S3 is awesome for that capability, and it's moving much more applications from its block-level storage device to now this great, scale. But the downside with this whole model is now you've mixed together data that is relatively static in nature that maybe you don't want to protect with data that actually is incredibly critical to any enterprise. And you got to try to figure out how to manage that with the tools that you have today. The second one is that durability had been known as the thing that was the greatest thing for S3, and it still is. The downside was durability didn't save things from like accidental deletions. There's a lot of ways to kind of work around this with MFA delete and many other capabilities, but those, if somebody has access to that environment, someone can get around that. And so there were a lot of fears around how do I manage an accidental deletion or a bad actor in my environment who may delete some of those data sets. And then lastly, the versioning and replication, which are still great, but using them just solely for data protection were incredibly challenging to work around. And let's talk about each one of these things on how we kind of enhance, at least on the replication and versioning side of the house. The first thing we heard from customers was that applications were being built and they were being deployed in a primary data store, typically in a single account or multiple accounts that were in S3 standard. And that was great because most of the overhead and challenges of accessing that data was relatively reduced. The first line of defense was versioning. And people implemented versioning, but unfortunately it was at a bucket level. What we found out was most developers were not kind of orchestrating and designing and architecting their buckets to be perfectly laid out so that one bucket has data they don't want to protect and one bucket has data they did want to protect. And so this brought a need for data classification. And secondarily, with versioning, you had the challenge of data being updated often. And so if I was using it for data protection, I would have somewhat of a bloat build out that maybe I didn't even need versioning turned on, but due to the nature that it had to be set at a bucket level, this was problematic. Second was that replication was great, because everyone needs replication for certain types of applications. Just like anything else out there, you need to replicate your data elsewhere. But replication just being used solely for backup, which many people were doing, was challenging for them because they had to manage not only a one-to-one mapping. So if I had 1,000 buckets on one side, I would need 1,000 buckets on another side. And if I added a new bucket, let's say to my primary site, I needed to make sure somebody was replicating that bucket elsewhere. And I could classify it by prefixes, but I still needed that bucket elsewhere. The last part we heard from customers was that if I'm having small files and I'm using, let's say, IA on the infrequently accessed on the secondary side, I end up with a bit of a metadata overhead and sometimes one-time put costs, as you'll see, that are actually more than the storage itself. And so this just wasn't really a way of doing data protection. Replication has lots of great use cases, but just wasn't solely focused on it. And we realized that we really needed to enhance this model with replication.
Yeah, awesome. Certainly replication and versioning are important to us and our customers. One of the things that was striking to me, though, as we thought about S3 and how to protect it, was that the actual nature of S3 has been changing over the years. I think we all know it used to be S3 is a durable object store, but now with the advent of serverless, event-driven architectures, S3 is almost not only that durable object store, but also your primary data store. And with any primary data, it needs protection. And I think for us, that was the actual thing that we kind of took a moment to reflect on and think through how do we actually go about that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is also an interesting transition we heard a lot from customers is as they were kind of going through the model of lifting and shifting certain applications and then re-platforming them later, Object became much more critical in nature, where everything kind of resided in EBS to start with. Now we were starting to see this transition where S3 became not only the static data source, but also the ability to hold a lot of critical data sets that were, let's say, not using PaaS services, but we're pushing it somewhere else. Yeah. plus analytical environments that were running analytics on top of unstructured data sets were all of a sudden becoming more and more critical in environments, and again, needing more and more protection. So all of this made us really realize that we needed to build a new platform, a new solution in our platform called Clumio Protect for Amazon S3. And the key capabilities behind this first was really to be able to deliver the ultimate ransomware protection that provided data outside the customer's environment, similar to what we did in other use cases, but provide point-in-time access to that data. This was another big challenge, was versioning was great, but you only had a copy of when the version changed. You didn't have what the entire bucket looked like in one point in time. And it was in the same account that you were in. And so you had the concern about ransomware attacks or bad actors and the like. There was also no inherent way to do global visibility, as we talked about before. So being able to see that all in one single pane of glass and be able to see it across all of your accounts, buckets, prefixes, regions in one view was incredibly valuable with our protection groups, which we'll talk about next. We were also able to derive an overall lower cost of ownership, or lower RTO as well, with the ability to do granular recovery as well as global searching within S3. Again, it's not all about finding the data and just moving the data. It's a lot about finding the data. And so the ability to do global search reduced the overall recovery time in many cases down to minutes, where it took hours previously to just find what you were looking for. And then lastly, we built in a whole bunch of efficiencies, which we'll go through here shortly, which enable overall lower cost, but also reduce many of the overheads that were built into the existing solutions people built themselves with versioning and replication solely for data protection. And so we built a solution that just was better than what you could build yourself. How this architecture works, we'll get a little bit deeper into how the solution's built out, is first we do a very simple onboarding. It enables the deployment of via CloudFormation template or via Terraform, an agentless and infrastructureless deployment. So we have an IAM role that asks for permissions for things like inventory and for CloudTrail events, and for the ability to be able to do gets and puts on the customer's behalf in their account. Second is we have the ability to create a vault inside of our solution of which stores the customer's data, and that can exist in any region that you'd like. And it allows you to have that point-in-time backup sent to our service and have that global search and all of the data classification stuff we'll show you with protection groups next. Third, we built in the ability to see multi-accounts. So you can now specify many accounts and predict or specify a particular prefix that you'd like. So if you have database dumps in every single one of your accounts, you could create a protection group to manage all of those accounts in one view and protect them via a single policy. Next, we provide global visibility at this protection group level so you can see exactly what's going on and whether you're delivering the business requirements along the way. And then lastly, we opened up a new way of doing recovery altogether that not only was fine-grained, but was flexible. So you could recover to any account, any tier, any bucket, any prefix, and it enabled really new functionality that didn't quite exist in any of the solutions that we saw out there. One of the big innovations that were built in was a protection group. A protection group is a way of orchestrating the classification of data so that you can simplify it versus just having to do it either at a bucket level or multiple buckets. And it allowed you to classify that data set into one view. It allowed you to globally search that particular protection group, and it allowed you to set compliance at a protection group level. And the win here is that you were no longer having to manage buckets or prefixes that you were replicating. You could do all of it in one view. How this is set up is incredibly easy. First, you go and look at what buckets you want to protect across your accounts. Second, you go and specify which prefix within those buckets that you want to exclude or include or exclude within any environment. So let's just say, as an example, I have in every account, I have a bucket that has a database dump, and inside of database dump as the prefix has a junk data inside of it. I may or may not want to have that junk data backed up. I also may have multiple tiers of storage in database dump that I may or may not want to protect as well. And so the second step here is that you can go and define which tier of S3 that you actually want to protect. So you may only want to do S3 standard or IA, and maybe not Glacier or Deep Archive for protection. And you can now specify that tier, again, at the protection group level to ensure that you have good data classification. Lastly is versioning is not required with our solution, and it allows you to reduce that. But if you have it enabled today, you have the ability to be able to define whether you want to protect all versions in that protection group or just the latest version that's available today to really fine-grain focus on what you're actually trying to protect in that protection group. And then at the end of this, what you do is you define the policy. How often you want to do backups for point in time, how long you want to retain those data sets, and then where you want to actually land those data in whatever region. And this is done with our global protection policies, which are applicable to any of our data sources. So you can have a gold protection policy that could go across your Microsoft 365, your EBS, EC2, RDS, DynamoDB, all in one view to have a specific type of retention. What's nice about this is you have buckets of all sorts of shapes and sizes. Each bucket may have different types of data that has different compliance mechanisms. And so for optimization around this, for data classification, protection groups allows you to bucketize what you actually want to protect and how long. And so in this case, I have 3 different protection groups, of which one has a 1-year retention model, one has a 7-year retention model, and then the other is just for everything else, maybe a catch-all that's a 30-day retention model. And I can specify how often I want to take backups for any of these data sets as well. The value here is that even in the same buckets, you may have mixes of different types of data. And so by being able to classify that into protection groups and then define where you want that data to land, it adds significant value in both cost reductions so that you're not retaining data for long-term duration that you don't need, or you can also just say, I don't want to protect particular data sets that are out there in those buckets as well. Charlie, talk to me a little bit about some of the data classification that you've been working on.
Yeah, you bet. I think for us, one thing that was striking was certainly the programmability of Clumio through APIs. I think we all know that automation is certainly first and foremost in our minds, and that's especially true for a managed services provider and our clients. With Clumio, we were able to actually program through the pipeline any data classification, tagging, or other policy as data was created or as applications were deployed. And for us, this was probably one of the more paramount feature sets that we were looking for that differentiated Clumio for us. I think when I think about automation today, it's almost table stakes, right? But if you look at solutions out there, oftentimes it's overlooked and it's API second, not API first. And for me, honestly, this was a big aspect for us from Clumio.
Yeah, many of our customers love the ability to be able to automate and orchestrate, especially if you have thousands of accounts out there. Many of our customers, will automate the entire onboarding of 1,000 accounts over just a couple-hour period of time, and it will run full inventory so that they can see just and discover what assets they even have available out there. In many cases, most customers don't even realize how much total EBS they have, or RDS, or EC2, or S3, and classification of that data is incredibly important first to have that great visibility. Inside of the recovery mechanisms of Clumio Protect for S3, we built in a bunch of fun capabilities to allow you to get the data faster. The first is, you don't have to go searching through each version. We give you this nice calendar view in every one of our data sources so you can quickly orient all of your recovery points for that particular date. And so in this case, you can see that I have a recovery point of a backup that we did within S3, and I can recover objects, or I can recover buckets directly. And what's nice here is that this is in a calendar. So if somebody asks you, I want to see what that file looked like on December 31st for some audit requirement, you don't have to try to figure out whether you send them the June 5th version or the February 3rd version and feel weird about sending them not on the December 31st date. And you can see everything in that December 31st date plus search for it. On top of this, we put a whole bunch of flexibility into the recovery process. One of the things that's challenging here is that you may want to recover hundreds of objects, buckets, entire prefixes, and move them to alternate accounts. With protection groups, we allow customers to be able to not only recover to any bucket, but any prefix, dump it into any tier of S3, and give you the ability to be able to recover to any AWS account. You can imagine this being incredibly powerful in the event that you have a ransomware attack where you need to recover all of the data within one particular account that was compromised. Clumio gives you the ability to be able to recover that entire data set, even across multiple accounts, into a single bucket to an account elsewhere. And if you're looking for a particular object, we enable the ability to do both global filtering and search. So you can go look for files that are over 64K, a particular file type, a particular account that it's in, and search wildcards for different file names. And this allows you to be able to find data quickly and then just recover that particular object or bucket or whatever you like and walk through that workflow of the flexible recovery design. Charlie, how has this been working for you guys?
Yeah, honestly, it's tough to show in the slides. I don't think it shows itself as fair as it could. Honestly, the recovery, in my mind, starts with discovery. And I think the UI and the actual APIs that we use to do the discovery, they're actually able to find the data in an extremely fast manner, which is why I think sometimes slides don't necessarily show it that well. We oftentimes have to restore data for customers via, as Chad mentioned, prefixes, maybe tags. Maybe sometimes it's a point in time for certain parts of the data set, or it's another point in time for another part of the data set. And these difficult and complex restorations oftentimes would require tons of discovery and tons of time for our team that we actually now don't have to worry about, which is awesome.
So when you look at point-in-time recovery, it's quite a dramatic difference between what many customers had built themselves with versioning capabilities. And first, if you look at just the protection granularity and the recover points, it's a world apart. The first is that you now can protect at a granularity that's not just at a bucket level. You can now start looking at one-to-many accounts, one-to-many buckets, or one-to-many prefixes, all in one abstraction layer, and give yourself point-in-time access to those assets at any point in time that you schedule, whether it's daily, monthly, or annual points that you do backups. The recovery granularity is also quite different as well, where previously you would recover an object, and you'd recover that object to the account that it's in. Now you have the ability to be able to recover one-to-many buckets, prefixes, or objects, and recover that to any account, whether it's existing or net new. The nice part with Clumio is that you can register a new account that you create in AWS and then go ahead and restore data from that account, from that service into that account at any time that you'd like. One other area that was relatively problematic, and this is probably not the most realistic example on the planet, but many of our customers found that they thought they were optimizing small files. But in many cases, a large percentage, and when I say large, 1 to 2% of their overall capacity was small files that were landing in an area where small files were, had a lot of bloat overall from a cost modeling perspective. Where you're metered at, let's say, 128K, and you're running 2 to 4K files, you're paying an increased amount on top of that. So one of the things we did inside of Clumio is that we enabled the bundling of data so that customers could still keep the small file architecture for many of the different things that they were dumping into S3, but do so in a highly efficient mechanism so that we could actually take the data and bundle it all together into 4 megabyte chunks. You don't pay the high put costs. You don't pay the inflated costs. Let's say if you're doing all 1K files, as in this example, you're not paying the 127K worth of metering that you're not actually storing the data set into, and you're not paying the high put costs on top of that. What we've done at Clumio is really optimize the small files so that you can get good cost reduction with getting the same experience without having to build it yourself, manage it yourself, and then when you do restores, having to go through the problematic game of trying to restore the bundled data and then finding the data that you want inside of it, which is what a lot of our customers were actually doing just to get around this overall model. We also built in 2 different tiers because everyone loves the different tiers within S3, and so we wanted to have 2 different types of data sets that we could store inside of it. The first is that we have a cold tier, which allows customers to be able to get frequent access to it without much challenge or much cost basis to do the recovery. And we have just a 60-day minimum per object. But it was giving you the same level of ransomware protection and all of the values that I talked about, quick recovery with protection groups, but do so for data that's accessed more often. For many of our customers, this is just a backup. It's more of an insurance policy to make sure that they have access to the data in the event that something bad happens. And so in many cases, they were just looking for an overall frozen tier. I want it to be as cheap as possible, but I want it to be accessible. Maybe not instantly, but if I need access to it, I want to make sure I have it. And so we also built in a frozen tier that enables customers to be able to get great cost reduction for especially long-term retention. And then longer term, we'll actually go build in a model of being able to auto-tier these things down. But for today, we have just 2 separate tiers for right now.
Yeah, so one of the things we looked at too for Clumio and data protection in general was about immutability. I think we've talked about it a little bit today. I think as we all know, we live in a shared responsibility model world. For our clients, that means we do some things, they do some of the same sometimes, or another third party could be doing other things in the accounts as well. This drives questions. Who has access to the account? Can data actually be deleted? Can an accidental deletion occur? Or could a bad actor accidentally get into the account and do damage? For us, with Clumio as a service that's totally distinct and outside of our account and air-gapped, this was honestly a big deal for us and something that we can sleep well at night with, if you think about it that way. I think this we've touched on the immutability a little bit, but in terms of this shared responsibility model, I think this kind of really hits home for me. So,
good points. So just to dig a little bit deeper into some of the security mechanisms and features that we built into the platform to ensure data is actually incredibly safe and validate the safety of that data. First is we start off with immutable storage. Data is stored in S3. We use end-to-end encryption. Data is both encrypted in flight and at rest. And in the event that you want to use your own keys, you can use your own keys and envelope that with our encryption keys so that you have full audit access, understanding when data is accessed, and really understand what's going on with the data set. You can also revoke that key at any point in time if you want to, and we have no access to it whatsoever. Data is also never persisted in an unencrypted way. Even when we do file-level indexing, we're doing this in memory via IAM roles and machine-driven credentials, and then deleting that instance at the completion of that effort. And so we never have any persisted data set that is ever in any way unencrypted. We've also built in multi-factor authentication, so you have the ability to be able to set access controls to whatever your enterprise did with single sign-on. We support many of the single sign-on vendors that are out there. And so you can set the same kind of access controls that you built into your business, but apply them into the platform itself. We also realize that people need different levels of access, especially around accessing recovery of data, because not everybody needs to see the same data sets, nor do they need to see the same accounts. And so we built in access controls at an entity level as well as a role-based level. And so you can categorize different organizational units of which have access to particular accounts or assets, and then define the level of granularity you may want to have access to. As an example, our RDS solution allows you to do direct query on an RDS instance that's not actually running. It's inside of our service. And so you can query it via normal SQL commands and be able to get a CSV export of what that data set looks like to be imported into another data set or another RDS instance or wherever you'd like. And you want to make sure you specify who has access to be able to do queries on top of those data sets to ensure that you don't have data leakage inside of it. We also provide full audit controls, so you can see every single thing that happens within the platform and be able to be reassured that nobody is taking beyond their access that they should have. The last part is an innovation that's really no innovation at all. And it's kind of funny to think about many vendors that have a delete button out there. People accidentally do stuff all the time. And that's probably the biggest reason to protect your data is not a malicious thing, but actually an accidental thing. And the last thing you want is somebody to go delete a backup that you have out there of which you use as your last line of recovery. And so we put no delete button in the platform whatsoever. You can't have somebody who maliciously gets a control to your logins, let's say at Clumio, and get past all of your controls, and then go and delete the backup of which you're relying upon to get back from some sort of malicious event. We also hold to many compliance and various certifications, including HIPAA compliance, PCI, DSS, as well as SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2, and then ISO 27001 and 701. We do annual pen tests as well as quarterly pen tests, which we can provide to customers so you can see how highly secure our platform is in order to support the protection of your data. We've also built this platform natively on the cloud itself. We started about 4 years ago, and we had the benefit of not trying to apply all of the things that we learned on building a node on-prem or building a legacy-based product. We got to start fresh and look at how we build event-driven systems, heavily Lambda functions. Lambda functions are a heavy basis of what we do for functional processing, so that we can truly understand all of the functions that are going on with the system, which allows our support infrastructure to understand exactly what happens within the system at any point in time and resolve those issues before customers realize it. But it also brings in that independent scale of compute and storage, which you don't find in much more of the legacy approaches, which we're used to building things that ran in data centers all the time. Instead of actually just being event-driven to what actually occurs, and then scale compute to massive amounts in the event that you need to reconstruct files, or maybe you need very, very little storage to do those type of operations. So this is a quick summary of some of the secrets that we built into Clumio Protect. First is the data classification with our protection groups, which allow you to really clearly define what you want to protect in your data set and be able to define the policies of how long you want to retain that data. Second is that we built in small file optimization, which allows the bundling or segmenting of data into 4 megabyte chunks in our service and reduces the overhead both in cost as well as puts for small file operations if you're using replication or let's say versioning. We also remove the need to do versioning. You can keep it on if you want, but there's no reason why you need to keep it going once you've done your first full backup. And this reduces the overall cost for maybe areas you didn't need to actually use versioning for. And if it has high change rates, it's causing a lot of incremental capacity to grow. We built in multiple tiers so that you can define whether you want to keep the data very, very accessible or whether you want to get the cost reduction of keeping data in a lower frozen tier to help you reduce the overall cost of the solution for protection. We built this as a fully managed service. I know a lot of people, especially at these events, love building it themselves. But at the end of the day, this is a big enough challenge for people to deal with that it's not on typically your strategic advantage to build it yourself, where there's much more focus on your strategic aspects, where we can take that off your hands and also build in all the optimization that we've been building over the last 4 years. And then lastly, we get the cloud native scale. We built this from the cloud up, which allows us to be able to scale independently storage and compute so that we can not only take advantage of the scale of S3, which is nice, but we take advantage of all of the newest computing methodologies to really be able to scale this to any size environment without having to have that kind of fixed compute and storage altogether. All right, well, we appreciate everyone joining our session here today. We'll do a quick Q&A at the end, but a quick call to action at the end of this is, first, check out our booth. We've got all demos for S3, for Clumio Discover, for EC2, EBS, RDS, a whole bunch of other things just to show you around Clumio Protect. So come check out our booth at the expo. This solution is available via AWS Marketplace, and we will be putting S3 on Marketplace right on the first week of December, so that will be available out there. And you get 1 month of full access to it. So you can spin this thing up and play around with it for 1 month, and check out all of the cool feature sets, both with Discover, which gives you the ability to see all of your environments in one single pane of glass, and then also Protect, giving you all of the abilities that we talked about previously. It's incredibly simple to set up, only about 15 minutes, and give you all of the values that we talked about previously. All right, so thank you again for coming to the session. Do we have any questions at all out there? Hi. It's a future capability we're working on. We're looking for more demand from Fed to really make that be a big priority out there. So we'd love to chat about what you guys are doing out there. Questions? Other ones?
Can you explain a little bit to us why snapshot managing itself is not enough? Why is snapshot, not as good as a Clumio backup?
Good question.
And why do I need we use versioning, to prevent accidental deletion of S3 objects. Why would that not be sufficient?
Yeah, good questions. So on the snapshot management side of the house, this was great for operational recovery, but it lacked a lot of the key capabilities that enterprises were asking for. First and foremost was snapshots are in the account and inside of the security sphere of that end customer. So you may have created great kind of architectures around IAM roles and who has access to various different things, but trust me, if they're in your organization, people find mechanisms to get around that and go delete those snapshots. Secondarily, many customers were looking for the ability to be able to do fine-grained granularity for recovery, as well as the flexibility of recovery. So I want to be able to recover files or EBS volumes or the entire EC2 instance and do so across accounts versus just having to keep it locally in that account and share those snapshots across each of those. Snapshots really went back to an older world of just instance level recovery. For versioning itself inside of S3, well, that was a nice capability because it was available inside of S3. It really limited your ability to give fine-grained focus on your what you wanted to protect. Developers were never really focused on what they wanted to protect when they built the buckets that data was being dropped into. And it forced you to be able to create versioning at that entire bucket level. And that was one of the bigger challenges that we heard out there. Also, the same kind of thing applies to what I talked about snapshots. In the event that you've set MFA delete and versioning and all of these other things, somebody can find a way around that if it's not air-gapped outside the customer's environment. So one of the big asks that many enterprises had was, give me a data set that my team does not have access to, cannot delete, and cannot find mechanisms to get around the security mechanisms that we built as controls in our environment. Good question.
I have the next question. This is great, loved it, but I didn't hear you talk about price at all. So I'm curious, like how does your solution compare in price? And also some of the third-party solutions I've tried, they've had like hidden costs, like where they're running a bunch of stuff in my account, and then I'm like, hey, what is all this EC2? Can you comment on what your solution has?
Yeah, great question. So the first one, I'll take the second part first, is we're an infrastructure-less deployment, which is incredibly nice because you don't have a bunch of EC2 instances deployed inside of your account that are running all of the time that are just eating up incremental costs. At the same time, too, we built in a bunch of efficiencies into our solution because we have to. We own the cogs of the overall solution, whereas most of the deployments are deployed inside of your account. So any inefficiency, unfortunately, you pay for. And so there's not an inherent mechanism to focus on driving down the cost because the customer ends up owning it. Our cost model drives down about a 50% reduction in cost for things like EC2, EBS, RDS in comparison to, let's say, replicating snapshots to an alternate account. And even without replication provides cost reduction, especially, let's say, around S3. When you get into a world of small files, you pay an incremental cost that dramatically increases depending upon what you replicate to. The lower tiers may have a lower storage cost. It may have a much higher overhead associated to them when you do things like accessing and the like. Lastly is the versioning drives a pretty substantial cost basis for data that changes often as well. And so by turning that off, we also reduce inherent costs. Our cost modeling is almost dead on, maybe a little bit less than what AWS charges for snapshots. So for EC2 EBS, we're usually around 4 to 5 cents per gig, depending upon if you're going through Marketplace or going through our sales organization. For S3, we're very close to what the cost basis would be for S3 standard, and we remove significant amounts of overhead that typically is not included in the overall TCO that most people model. Like there's another question over here.
I have another question. It's regarding the security encryption. You handle it like directly with the key management store for AWS, or Clumio has their own encryption management system?
I could barely hear you on that. Sorry, say that again?
I ask you now better.
There we go.
Okay. So it's regarding the encryption. So is Clumio interact directly with AWS key management storage, or Clumio have their own key encryption system?
Great question. So Clumio is built on top of AWS, and so we're using our own KMS internally for our own encryption mechanism, but you can also bring your own KMS key, of which we envelope together so that you have the ability for audit, access, and understanding when data is accessed in the environment. So inside the UI itself, if you set up no KMS key, we're by default encrypting all of the data, both in flight and at rest. If you want to add an additional layer, you can bring your own key. Great question.
Hi, I have the next question over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so S3 already has the durability, as you mentioned. I was wondering, so why do you still need the protection?
Good question. So while durability is great to ensure that the data is available, it doesn't protect against things like accidental deletions. And this was one of the big areas that enterprises continued to talk to us about, which is, as the data is durable and maybe, it will never be lost, accidents happen. Ransomware attacks happen. Misconfigurations or bad scripts happen, which cause data to be deleted. And whether it's durable or not, if data gets deleted, in many cases, it goes away no matter what. And so by having data outside the environment, it avoided the need for any sort of additional protection, which many people were doing with versioning or replication solely for that. And so we just able to optimize that workflow. You still get the great durability of S3, that doesn't change whatsoever, and everyone loves that. But you get the ability to ensure data is protected outside the environment as well. Great question. All right, looks like that may be it. Well, we thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day and a great rest of the show.